What was I supposed to say? Oh, so I am from a little bit of New York and a little bit of Los Angeles. As a kid, I was primarily in New York and kind of back and forth my whole life, which is cool because I've seen both places transition. For my first camera or experience with a camera was I grew up with a bunch of crazy New Yorkers, chain smoking, screaming New Yorkers. And there was a Polaroid, and I grabbed it. I was 6 years old, grabbed the Polaroid, and I said freeze, and the whole room, 20 New Yorkers screaming over each other, froze for a picture. And I realized in that moment I wanted to be a photographer, that you had this power over anyone, really. You can get anyone to stop what they're doing, pose, or listen to you, and that was like an amazing power as a 6-year-old. So that was the first moment. My grandmother was one of the first female photo editors in the world, and she was the photo editor for Audubon magazine, which was like a big nature magazine, still Audubon, it's really famous. And she tried to convince me not to be a photographer and told me for a good part of my life that I was not a good photographer. I would never make it, and made the stakes much higher for me. But I just ignored her, and she has always been one of my great inspirations as a woman working in a primarily male-dominated industry, which, you know, never really fazed any of us. But I looked up to her for that, and her eye, her ability to do things despite the odds. It was kind of a major thing for me.
What was your first professional gig? So how'd that go? What was it?
Oh boy, okay, so when I was around 18 or 19, I got the Canon, like the best Canon at the time, and I got, I started doing like some portrait stuff, and I got like some jobs shooting wedding dresses. And I was very into angles and light and playing with these, like almost like a classical style of photography. And I was working in the dark room. I was working with this guy kind of doing his darkroom stuff. So I was just teaching myself everything. And then from that, I moved into like a lot of music photography and did some pictures with Rolling Stone. And I did some of the very, very first pictures of the Black Keys, which was, I think I shot them the first picture ever used in Rolling Stone of the Black Keys, which was like long before they were playing little tiny gigs around town, which was cool.
How'd you get into the galleries?
I got really fascinated by crime scene photography and realized, like, I grew up with all artists. My mother was a painter. I didn't know anything else. Like, I didn't know how to have a normal job. I did not go to art school. It didn't occur to me to go to art school because I was just always doing it. I was kind of looking at art or photography as an art form. And that was when it really wasn't, it was just starting to get a little recognition as an art, but art collectors were not collecting photos. You talk to somebody about like, that collected art, and you'd say, whoa, why don't you get a photo? And they were just confused by you. And painters would be really nasty and be like, you're not an artist, you're a photographer. There's like this thing going on. And I was really like, in my mind, I was as much a painter as a photographer. So I never saw it like that because I didn't know how to use a camera. It was just a tool to get what was in my mind onto paper or my canvas. So I decided to do a big art show and came across this space. And I remember telling my father, like, I'm doing this art show. It's going to be amazing, and all these giant art pieces and photos. And later he told me, after I did the show, he goes, I was just sitting there thinking, what the fuck is she talking about? What art? So I did this. I got this amazing space in Silver Lake. It was a space that was owned by the woman who owned the Paramore, and she had a 4,000 square foot warehouse, and I got, I did half the crime scene photos, and I blew them up really big. And then we were hanging the work, and I had this moment where I was like, I only have 100 people in my mailing list. Like, who the hell am I going to invite to my art show? And I'd spent all my money. All my money was gone. Like, I had no money. And there was like this whole thing where somebody was like, oh, I know someone who has the Mocha mailing list, and if you show up with $20 in an alley, we'll give you the Mocha mailing list. And I was like driving over. I still don't know what mailing list this was, but I gave some lady in an alley who was angry $20, and it got this incredible mailing list and mailed out like 4,000 hard invites of the piece that's now in the Getty of the hanging woman to the Mocha, allegedly the Mocha mailing list. And I was expecting like drop off, and that opening night there was like thousands of people showed up to the thing. It was like a line down and around the block of I think they all thought it was some Mocha event.
So talk about some of your biggest exhibitions.
I did multiple solo shows with Ace Gallery, so city block exhibitions. I did the crime scenes in Korea. I did it like the the Ace type Gagosian of Korea. I did a big solo show there. In Gangnam, I've shown it in Japan, just all over the world. I did the Mocha in Florida. I did a solo show there. And recently the work was included in Icons of Style at the Getty Museum, which they also acquired the piece and own now the high fashion crime scenes is in the Getty. And I have a survey show coming up with the MoA Museum, and probably a bunch of other. I have a book coming out in Japan.
Talk about the process of the crime scene series. Like, give us a sense of the logistics of you getting the spaces and.
Okay, so for high fashion crime scenes, the way I went about it was I went to the chief of police. I kind of stalked him a little bit. At the time it was Bratton, who was the chief of police in Los Angeles. And I told him about my series. And I always had this thing, if I needed something, this is a secret, one of my secrets, I just talk forever, and then people just kind of say, okay, whatever you need, get out of here. So he ended up giving me full access to the LA crime scene archive, and I got this amazing archive. And really what I'm doing is I'm exploiting these images and these horrible things that have happened. So I'm recreating them in fashion and glamming them up as kind of a social commentary in a tongue-in-cheek way, but it's also pretty messed up. And so I did that I set up a series of rules. The one thing I do instinctively, and I don't know why, but whenever I start a series, I set up guidelines. So instinctively with the crime scenes, for myself, I said, okay, I'm not going to work with any picture post 1950. I'm primarily looking for crime scenes where the victim is, a John or Jane Doe, they're unidentified or the crime file was lost. I'm, working with, images that open up a story to me. To me, it's the end to a story. So it should almost open up this whole world. So I had these rules, and high fashion crime scenes became the feminine series. And after I did a war series, which was the masculine, they kind of play off each other. So there was for that, and then I got to know the LA. I was doing an autopsy recreation, so I got to know the LA County Coroner at the time, who was this guy, David Campbell. He was the chief of the coroner's office, and he came to a lot of my shows and was really a nice person. I was just working with these people and realizing how interesting this whole facet of life is, and the science behind it, the forensics, and now I'm actually on the advisory board of the School of Forensics in Los Angeles, which is one of the biggest ones. So I'm working with them a lot now to help with equipment and stuff.
Talk about the locations you would shoot at.
So for high fashion crime scenes, for the locations, I would look for areas that either replicated the exact crime scene or the exact location of the crime scene. So oftentimes it would be, I would recreate the space. Up to, like, sometimes I had a crew of, some of my shoots involved up to 100 people to recreate these scenes. But like, I hand built rooms and recreated like all these little things and went to prop houses and built walls. Like early on I was doing it all myself. I would buy a fabric downtown and glue it onto a wall to create the wallpaper and and even the fashion actually. When I first started, I had no money or recognition in the fashion industry, so I did have an American Express card. So I would go to Barney's and buy up to like $10,000 in clothes a day, because there's like no limit on if you get American Express, they gauge I don't know how they do it, but it's just limitless money. And I would go buy everything and then return it the next day, and like, they hated me. And then eventually Barney's like started supporting me, and I got featured in the New York Times, the first teen magazine, which was cool. And I mentioned Barney's, and then the next thing you know, I was like, oh, come borrow stuff from us. And early on, like the Rodarte girls would bring clothes to once I started getting press, they would bring clothes to my house, and designers started sending me stuff, so it got a lot easier. But early on, it was like, I always felt like I was like on the brink of going to jail.
So you do like guerrilla style on some of these shoots?
Oh yeah, so high fashion crime scenes was all guerrilla style. Like there were moments where we snuck into the LA River, and my crew, I had all my stylists and the models, and then police helicopters came in. We were like literally running from the police to get away because we were there illegally. So it was I used to really love kind of that risk. And then I started the next series. I was showing, I always have this like theory, and maybe it's not totally ethical, but I feel like you do whatever you need to do to get the art done. Not anything harming people, of course, but you do what you need to do. And then once you start like making money and doing stuff, you start to like get more legitimate. So now I'm, for 10, 15 years, I get permits and very legit.
What kind of equipment do you use?
Well, I'm very into Hasselblad. I have I'm not like committed to any brand. I used Leica for the last project I did, and but Hasselblad has been the one that was kind of a game changer for me, where I could really blow the work up to 10-foot prints, which is kind of like what I'm known for, these giant photos. I love my Hasselblad. I went, and for years I only shot film, and finally when they hit the 50 megapixel one, it was like, okay, I can buy this camera, and finally digital works for me. So, and the other camera I love that I play with, it's not really what I use for my art as much, but I love the Sony R7, whatever, and it has this capability of shooting like in almost pitch black, and you can make it like day. It's really a beautiful camera. The chip is, I don't know what it is. It's magic camera. I love it.
So you sound like you're self-taught.
Yeah.
So talk about how you taught yourself.
So yeah, I'm totally self-taught. I was rejected from art school, and my family really didn't have the funds to send me to school. So it really didn't occur to me. There was just a moment where I was like, I'd like to go to art center. And then I went in and was like, I want to go to art center. And they're like, no. So never went to art center. Yeah, so for me, what it became, I knew I loved photography, but it was about this visualization. Like every picture, and even now, I see exactly the image what I see it done in my head. So it becomes, my whole process is problem solving. I do all my own lighting. Everything is, but it's problem solving. Like, how do I get this to look like what's in my head? And it's maybe it's like a process of extraction. I'm extracting what's in my little brain. So that's how I learned. I mean, and in the beginning, I was shooting with a Canon. Some of the first pictures I did, nobody was blowing up 35 millimeter into these giant prints. I was one of the first people to do that. But I knew I had to because it was in my head, and all I had was a 35 millimeter camera. I didn't know how ISO, I didn't know anything. So I had on auto. Like, the first pictures I ever did were just auto on my camera in the early, 90. And so to get the prints super big from these little 35 millimeter negatives, I started thinking, like, okay, digital's coming in, and how are these billboards so big? So I found this guy that was involved in making billboards, and I found this crazy software that would repixelate my pixels and then suddenly I could blow up these pictures so they were massive. But it was like, weird computer. I'm pretty good with computer stuff, so I would just do these weird increments of 10% and 10% and add these pixels in, and then like it worked magic. But if I knew what I was doing, if I actually knew, I probably would have been shooting with a large format camera, and nothing would look the way it looks. Like, I have a very defined look because it's all been my invention.
So who are your favorite photographers?
My favorite photographers, like, I love, and it's not what I do, but I have a dream of doing it when I'm very old. I love war journalism. So a lot of my favorite photographers are war journalists. I always say there's like creating moments and capturing moments, and it's definitely capturing moments is the art of war journalism. But for the people that are my favorite are the great cinematographers. I'm very inspired by movies and cinema. I'm a cinephile. The great cinematographers have always been my inspiration. And I'm bad with names, but I could name and a lot of the old French New Wave. I love that rawness of, we don't need all these fancy Hollywood lights or giant trucks. We're gonna just film a movie and make a movie. I like that. So that's a lot of my inspiration.
Outside of photography, talk about your DJ work.
Okay.
And why do you do it?
Besides photography, I do DJ, but that's more of I think an outlet for me. It's so different from, I kind of fell into it with friends. My friend Chris Holmes, who's now on tour with Paul McCartney, he opens for Paul McCartney, he's amazing, once asked me to DJ with him at the Roosevelt Hotel a million years ago. It was so much fun, and for me, when I'm editing photos, I'm always listening to music, so it really inspires me visually. And as a photographer, as opposed to a filmmaker, you can listen to things. If you're on a deadline or working all night, that gets me through the night. So that became kind of like a way for me to just immerse myself into another thing I love. But another reason why I do is I used to have a lot of parties at my house, and I got sick of cleaning up. So everybody just goes to hang out at wherever I'm doing that. It's easier. But it's a lot of fun. It's also like a thing where you're not isolated. You're around people, so it's a different feeling.
Do you enjoy Los Angeles?
Yes, I love Los Angeles. For years, there was always this thing growing up where in New York, I would come to visit my family in LA or vice versa, and New Yorkers hated people from LA. They would be like, oh God, you're going to LA, it's so horrible. And I was like, yeah, it's terrible. It's 80 degrees in the winter. Whoa. So I always had a fondness for LA, but There was a little bit of the thing with like, it wasn't as sophisticated as New York, and now it is. Now it's hit. I think New York got kind of, you know, artists are constantly driven out of places, and LA is just in that little area right now where artists can have spaces and be here, and they're finally as a community, there are real galleries here. It's become a pretty important place, I think, internationally and culturally. A lot of my New York friends are here now. Now everybody loves it, by the way. Now that, like, they forgot about that, like putting LA down. But I don't know that I would ever, I like to go back to New York to visit, but I don't think I'd move back there at this point. It's just a different city. It's kind of sad to go back there. It's not like it was growing up, the old days.